Welcome, everyone. My name is Josh Campbell. I'm the CEO of Techonomy Media. We really appreciate you joining us today for be a great conversation with Rishad Tobaccowala. In a second, I'll hand it over to Drew Ayani of CDX, who will be conducting the interview.
Great. Thanks so much, Josh. Welcome, everybody, from wherever you are. I hope you are all well, staying safe and healthy. Rishad, it's great to see you. I always prefer to see you in person at our conferences and elsewhere out there. But this will have to do until we can all get back together in person. And I know you're very busy, just finished a book, writing some more. So thanks again. I know you're very busy, and thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for both inviting me and for everybody who's listening, watching.
Indeed. And so Rishad, I'll just start. How are you? Where are you? How are you coping?
I am in Chicago, where it has decided to snow on April 15th. So there's a lot of snow.
That's about right.
on the ground. I am fine. Our daughters who live in New York are fine. My wife still tolerates me, and I'm sitting at home. For the longest period of time in my life, I've not been on a plane.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Before we jump in, I'm just sort of curious, you're in terms of your daily routine, what are you doing, since the crisis started, on a day-to-day basis, whether it's educating yourself, relaxing, something that's helping you personally sort of, get through this on a day-by-day basis?
My sense is that I continue to do certain things, but do it every day. So I have this habit of waking up at 4:30 in the mornings just to study for an hour and a half. And that used to only happen when I was in Chicago. Now it happens because I'm in Chicago every day. So I'm learning a lot more. I try to do one new thing, and it's a little hard to do one new thing when you go outside. So I subscribe to a channel called Criterion, which is probably the best movies ever. I strongly encourage that. And I figured out that going up and down the 7 floors of the parking lot in my building, each round trip is a mile. So I do that 4 or 5 times every morning.
That's great. So let's jump in a little bit here. And I know you just wrote a book, Restoring the Soul of Business, and I want to get to that. But you have also been posting on Medium and elsewhere. You've been talking about this thing called the Great Reinvention as it relates to what's happening today. So, I'd love for you to share a little bit about that, sort of top line, and where did that come from, and what are those sort of core tenets from the Great Reinvention, and then we'll dig in a little bit further.
Definitely. So all of us remember 2008, 2009, and that was sort of known as the Great Recession. And then 1929, people were talking about the Great Depression, which most of us were not around for. And in many ways, this is different unlike a lot of the stuff that I've lived through over the last 40 years, which is 2000 or 40 business years of 2008, 2009, or 9/11, or the dot-com bust. This is very different because it is happening to everybody in the world at the same time. And nothing like that has basically happened. Again, most of us weren't around in the Great Depression, but it's happened to everybody all at the very same time. The other one is all the previous ones were either usually an economic crisis of some sort. And in 9/11, it was basically some sort of political, social crisis. All of them obviously were tragic. This one is basically a political, it is a financial, and most importantly, it is a humanitarian crisis. So it's the equivalent of an asteroid hitting the Earth, and it's the equivalent of taking all of those and scaling it up. So I don't believe using financial terms is the right thing. It's to rethink everything, which is why I call it the Great Reinvention. Now, one of the key things that I've studied is habits and behavior. And you can plan to do anything you want, but you don't actually do it unless you do it day after day. Or you can decide to stop doing something and you don't stop it unless you stop it day after day. What we don't realize is most of us, for 60 to 90 days, are either starting to do things or stopping to do things. And therefore, we are forming new habits.
Right.
And that's one. And therefore, we're going to come out with this Great Reinvention. And while everyone uses certain terms, and so the emotional terms people are using is anxiety, we're sort of anxious for our health. There is uncertainty because we don't know when this is going to end. And there is fear. There is obviously fear for our loved ones, but fear for our jobs, our livelihoods, etc. But I've sort of looked at it and thought about the great reinvention with a term called fragility. So my whole basic belief is we have to address fragility. And what this has shown is that we are fragile as human beings, obviously, because we can get ill and something can come and hurt us. But we're also fragile as a society. So for instance, 15% of all, 15 to 16% of the United States is immigrants. Currently, the people who are working on the front lines, whether they're in hospitals, delivery, et cetera, 30% are immigrants. In the city of Chicago, the population of Chicago, about 30% of Chicago is African American. 72% of the deaths of COVID-19 is African American, right? So what we're now basically beginning to see is all the fractures and the fault lines of society are also showing up. And then economically, when you think about the fact that most families don't have enough money to last 2 or 3 weeks, but what is also really weird is companies like Boeing, the exact amount of money they're now asking from the government, they paid back in buying back their shares the last 2 years.
Right.
So there's a very interesting thing, which is like, what the hell was everybody thinking?
Right.
So as a result, coming out of this, the only way to sort of address fragility is we have fragility at the society level, fragility at the human level, and fragility in the business economic level, is that all messaging and everything else moving forward should be recognizing that this is what people will be looking for. Safety, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, am I safe? Security, both economic and other security. And then what's the implication on society? And as a result, we're going to have significant changes around the world over the next 2 or 3 years, which is why I call it the Great Reinvention.
Indeed. And let's start a little bit macro in the corporation, and then we can start to dive in from sort of the marketing and looking at the future consumer and the impact of this on that consumer. You know, we certainly know that there was the business roundtable, right? And all the signatures from all the executives and concerning yourselves with multiple stakeholders and not just shareholders, right? It's not just about shareholder value. A lot of people thought, is that, you know, great, thank you for sending that out, but is it lip service? But now here we are, and we see a lot of great actions from corporations. Will this just accelerate that? Will we come out on the other side of a redefining, is it a reinvention of capitalism? You know, at the most sort of macro level, and what does the modern day corporation look like in that regard when we come out of this?
Well, you know, just like the modern day corporation today has many flavors, I would anticipate it will continue to have many flavors. But I would expect that the next corporation will, which is the piece I'm now writing, will sculpt into it resilience. So I think both society, companies, and people will be sculpting resilience into the company. So we will be retransforming resilience. So at the business level, what do I think that's going to happen? The first thing is most companies are going to basically make sure that they now have a rainy day fund, right? They're going to make sure that they have enough in, I mean, the reality of it is every company, including the company that I used to work for, Publicis, have drawn down their entire credit lines. Publicis just drew down $2 billion of credit line, which they didn't even need. Boeing drew down, everyone's just drawing down credit line, right? Which basically says, A, they're expecting this to be worse than most people expect, but B is they don't know if the money will be there day after tomorrow. So their whole stuff is, whether I need it or not, I'm taking credit lines. That costs money. It costs it in depressed stock because people ask you what the hell, and you have to pay interest rates. Something like Airbnb, the celebrated Airbnb, they just borrowed $1 billion at 11.5%. Okay, so what people are going to say is like, this sucks. And if the board doesn't realize it, people are going to recognize that that's one for sort of financial resilience. The other resilience they're going to basically have is they're going to actually have to have more money because taxes are going to go up. Right? Definitely corporate taxes are going to go up. This corporate tax cut that we recently enjoyed, that's gone because someone's going to have to pay for all of this. So there's going to be that cost. So we have to have resilience in that. And there's going to be resilience of supply chains. For most people, this just in time and relying on China doesn't work that well, right? But therefore, if you have resilient supply chains, which are different than efficient supply chains, that's going to cost money. So businesses are going to be sculpted. The other thing they're going to basically do is they're going to try to keep their costs as low as possible with the flexibility of going up thing. So as many people as possible will try to have less full-time workers and more flexible and contract workers. Interestingly, the technology companies have already done this. So of the 220,000 people working at Google, 125,000 are contract workers. So there'll be the sculpting of resilience, which will be very interesting in companies, whether it's supply chain, financing, employment, housing, everything.
Right. And what of the unicorns and some of these celebrated startups? And I mean, does WeWork even come back, like, at all? Like, so, and other unicorns and things like that.
So, my sense is that WeWork had three problems. They had one problem to begin with, and their biggest problem was what I call hallucinatory economics. Okay, so if you have enough marijuana, which their CEO had, you can create an economic model. And then you have someone who has delusions but launches a fund called the SoftBank Vision Fund, which really is a delusion fund, right? They had an economic model that made no sense. And I know a lot about economics, and there's no way I could make any of this make sense. But now they have two other problems, which is they have a audience, or which is their market problem, which is a lot. Yes, they do create spaces for large companies, but most of the stuff that they created were for smaller unicorn, hoping to be unicorn, and small 5-person, 6-person companies, or people like myself. If I needed to, now I'm a company of one. If I'm feeling lonely, I could go and hang out at WeWork, right? What happens is most people now recognize, hey, most of us are feeling poorer these days, and we're working from home, and we don't need no WeWork. So in effect, they have that. And then more importantly, their business model has fallen apart, because unless they basically bathe you in Purell before you enter, people won't want to work in those dense spaces, because their business model was basically to fit you into 75 square feet, which makes no sense. So they have an economic model that's destroyed, a target model that's destroyed, a business model that's destroyed. So I basically believe that you're going to basically see them slowly go out of business. And unfortunately, that is going to impact real estate in major cities.
And how do you feel about other, startups, whether they're unicorns or not, and the prospects for startups to say they have a great product and a great business model and great market potential? WeWork and some of the unicorns are particularly ones out of SoftBank, might be outliers, maybe not. But what about, I'm an old agency guy and I want to start something up. Just startups in general. How will they succeed moving forward?
I think what is tending to basically happen is right now, the people who are succeeding are people who have lots of cash. So the reality of it is, if you are a startup and you've managed to raise money and you know how to husband it, you've got, because this entire thing is basically a play for time. So people are basically saying, what's our burn rate and how much money do we have? So if you're a startup, it's very hard to raise money. What I'm hearing is it's really hard to raise money. So if you've got money, right, and you've got a runway of about 18 months, then it's fine. Otherwise, it's really, really hard. The problem really is startups require something called talent, right? Any company requires talent. But startups basically manage to get a disproportionate share of talent, primarily because of two reasons. One is there was potentially a payoff on the other end because of equity and a whole bunch of other stuff, and an environment that made you feel that you were in a college dorm. I mean, that was, it was basically, I've not really graduated from college, right? And I potentially could have this thing. Now, the reality of it is most companies fail, but now it's become very clear. You'll see all these failures, and what you're already seeing, and what I heard from a lot of people, including Scott Galloway when he spoke on Pivot, is from his own startup, he's losing people to the large established companies because people are saying, I want now safety. Remember safety, security, right? So they're going to have a hard time attracting talent unless they show they've got a lot of cash. But most startups tend not to have cash. And most of these unicorns are going to become popcorn. Okay? That's what I think, right? We're going to have unicorn will be replaced by popcorn. And unfortunately, that popcorn is not the popcorn that's going to be sold at theaters, because I don't think people are going to go and buy $8 buckets of popcorn. One of the things, if you notice in your grocery store, is popcorn is usually empty. It's like toilet paper. People are buying popcorn while Netflixing.
Well, let's talk a little about the consumer, and I encourage everybody to send Josh, our host, directly a message with your question. Ultimately, this is for all of you. So we're going to talk a little bit about the consumer here on the other side, and then I want to get it out to questions. So Rishad, so going with that, we had Rita McGrath last week, and I think she's on here, and she had a great quote. All consumer spending is up for grabs, every dollar, every yen, every euro. Let's talk a little bit about, consumers and how they're going to behave. We've talked about security being important. We've talked about their health. What are some of your thoughts on what that consumer landscape, looks like, as we start to come out of this? And I suppose we're going to have a pre-vaccine and a post-vaccine sort of, universe, but share with us some of your thoughts along these lines.
So I think the first thing to sort of recognize, and I do agree that almost everything is up for grabs, but I'm going to sort of use the word I tend to basically use, which is I use human and people versus consumers, because I've always believed that when you try to understand people as consumers, you miss everything. I've always said that even P&G, which is an incredible company, at heart, everything that they do is they remove dirt. So they understand people. If they understand people as consumers, they understand my dirt removal habits, from my butt, from my teeth, from my house. But that's not the way I define myself. So I try to use the word people or humans. And because what is tending to happen is, I think a majority of people, not everybody, but a majority of people, will be coming out of this with a newfound focus, right? And we don't know how long this focus will last, but there will be a newfound focus. And there are three characteristics of this focus. The first focus is, I got to figure out what the hell is important to me. Because it's not that every one of us has got this, but because, everywhere you see people with masks, this is probably the largest mass near-death experience many of us have had, okay? And usually when someone gets very ill in your family or you get ill, you actually start thinking, okay, what's important to me? So a lot of people are going to say, what's important to me in life? Not what is important to me in what I buy, but what's important to me in life. Not everybody, but quite a group of people will basically do that.
Yep, agreed.
The second is they're going to basically say, why was I doing what I was doing? And what should I now focus on instead, right? Because, for instance, there's a lot of stuff that I was doing, including like flying all over the place for having a 1 hour, 2 hour meeting. My whole stuff is, I'm just doing that with everybody, including boardrooms right now, and I don't lose anything, right? And they don't even know on the side I'm eating popcorn, right? So the idea basically is people are going to rethink because of these new habits or behaviors. Either you stopped or you started things. And then when it comes down to basically what they're going to spend on, I have a feeling that they're going to there's a group of people who are going to say, what can I cut? Because I now realize that I'm living in a little bit more of a fragile world. While others will basically say, let me seize on the most amazing experiences that I possibly can. So certain things that we have lost, right? Like a lot of people like sports and going to ball games and a whole bunch of other stuff. They'll really want to do that, right? And they may even pay a premium because in many ways, if you have social distancing and you only allow 1/3 of the people in there, it'll be those kinds of stuff. So that will be one of the key things that will happen. But the thing that I'm expecting, which is the one that I both as a business person and as a marketer am most concerned about but I'm aware of, is I think every single person, with the exception of certain categories like Purell or other places, have lost all pricing power. Okay, because what has happened is people have reset their pricing because a lot of people have started doing stuff for free. A lot of behavior power has changed. So the likelihood of me, and I basically am one of these like AMC members that pays $19.95 for unlimited number of movies and stuff like that, or 12 movies a thing. The reality of it is you'll start thinking, why am I doing this? So I think you're going to have a lot of behaviors. I think the movie industry is going to be completely changed. I think the restaurant industry is going to be completely changed. I think the ability for people to just say, hey, I'm going to charge this exorbitant price. So unless you deliver potentially great value, it's going to be an issue. So I anticipate there's going to be a resetting of costs and revenue that is much broader than what most people basically think, right? It's going to basically happen. And so in effect, I am going to basically ask for deals everywhere.
Yeah. No, right. The discount economy, right?
Yeah.
So let's, before we get to questions, I want to release some of the results of the poll here. So Josh, I'll let you take that on.
Yeah. So thanks, Drew. So yeah. So you guys, about 70% of you answered the questions, and I think Rishad, to your sort of last comment, especially hospitality, restaurants, travel, this is really telling, right? 36% of the people said I'll dine in restaurants less than I did previously. 35% said I'll travel less. I'll shop in physical stores less. So, everyone here is agreeing that they anticipate their behavior to radically change once we come out of this. Additionally, to your comments on WeWork and sort of flexible workspace, obviously the trend here, 54% of the people who responded saying that they'll work from home more than they did previously. So a huge factor on probably real estate and work.
This is great. Really good results. Thanks everybody for participating. Very insightful, and we'll consolidate those and send them to you as well. So Josh, I'd like to get out, this is for everybody here at the end of the day, so let's get out to some questions.
Sure. The first we'll go to a good longtime friend, Dave Morgan, who I believe probably Rishad and Drew you both know well.
Hey, Dave.
Dave, you're
on.
Hey,
guys. Rishad, thank you so much for doing this, and your book is extraordinary, and glad to hear your family's well. I would be remiss in talking about your great reinvention if we didn't talk a little bit about the industry and organization which you have most recently graduated from. How do you see the great reinvention hitting advertising businesses, and particularly the large holding companies? You talk about drawing down large, basically pulling down cash credit lines, but what do you think about the businesses?
So I'll speak broadly, and obviously on Publicis, for the last 6-7 months, I don't know anything more than what I read in the newspaper, believe it or not. I go out of my way not to be informed. And I'm not on the board, and I'm not on anything. So I just talk broadly about the industry, especially the larger companies. So I do believe that that the fundamental thing of helping clients rethink their business will be what will still be very, very important. I believe storytelling and brands will continue to be important, but how those are developed and will keep shifting as it has. With that being said, I sense that most of the larger companies will be smaller as we move into the future. And the reason I think we will be smaller is because most of the business models of large companies is we pay on a FTE basis. So we get paid on an FTE basis, which is the number of people working in a particular business. And the truth of the matter is that as at least the next 1 or 2 years, there's going to be sort of a decline in fees and decline in spending broadly. Obviously, some groups will spend more and some groups will spend less. I think the business will be smaller, and I think there'll be more use of flexible work, even though right now every company is cutting freelancers and contractors, et cetera. And I also believe that there will be less on the other side. I think, remember, there was a tendency or one of the threats for the companies were the in-housing of agencies. So clients taking agencies in-house, right? Which I always thought, even though I was working at an agency, but even forgetting that, was the stupidest idea I'd ever heard in my life because of a whole bunch of things, right? And that has been proved without a doubt to be the stupidest idea in the world. Because now you basically have, outside of the fact that you have a bunch of irrelevant people with irrelevant talent, but you can't fire us at 30 days. You got to give them a year's severance. Okay, so you've added cost structure when you shouldn't add cost structure. You remove flexibility when you can't add flexibility. And when the world of marketing changes, you've got one set of people. There is a reason for other people besides your own company. So I think that's the good side. But I think it's going to be very challenging. And it's going to be primarily challenging also because on the mix that you tend to have. So businesses that have a lot of business that has to do with travel and a lot of these categories that'll be slow will be harder. But it's going to be tough. But I think everything's going to be tough. On the positive side, I do believe that clients and marketers are desperate for new ways of thinking and new ideas, and companies that do that will do that well. So it's a mixed bag, but right now, I think it'll be smaller, but still very relevant.
That's great. Hey, quick follow-up on that, Rishad, and then we'll go back to questions. Does this bode well, again, agency specific, does this bode well for unbundling, rebundling? You know, does the time ahead push for, you know, agencies to think about creative and media together again? I don't even, it just sort of popped into my head and I haven't thought about it, but I'm curious about your.
I think there was a tendency for this to come together anyway, because what all the companies were doing, and everyone had sort of this different names for the same thing, right? Whether it was Team or Power of One or whatever, was how do you basically put together things better for a client? And there were two. One is because you needed people to work together. The other is you needed to basically eliminate, and clients were not going to pay for any duplicative costs or for internal friction. There's no price for that. And there were ways to put it together. However, you want to make sure what you're putting together is actually really different skill sets versus the same skill set. So what I mean is, when you go to Baskin Robbins, right, there's chocolate ice cream, vanilla ice cream, strawberry ice cream, and you decide what you want to have or some combination. You don't say, I want all 32 flavors together in one goo, right? And it's very, very important that some of this integration isn't integrating into goo when there isn't skill set, because skill sets are important. So how you come that together. So I think that is going to be one of the things that we're all going to basically sort of work at.
No, indeed. Josh?
Yeah, so Rishad, we had a question. The person couldn't join via video, but they were asking about brands taking new risks on new media platforms and new types of content that comes from this. So as a small media company, we're obviously hosting more of these roundtables. We're producing more content. Do you think brands will, while the budgets are smaller, invest in new media platforms faster than they once were before?
I think they will. And I think, you know, one of the jokes going around is, you know, who best transformed your organization, your CEO, your CFO, your chief digital officer, or COVID-19? And it's basically COVID-19. But it's going to be pretty dramatic. Just before this, I was doing a 2-hour session with leadership of a very well-regarded company. And, you know, one of the key issues was most of us are starting to create content much cheaper. And there's a story in my book about my daughter made a movie, and I was like running around as the key gaffer or whatever. And I realized how the economics had changed so dramatically. And in many ways, when you actually think about it, the idea of having massive studios and massive things, right? People are going to say, like, why? Including, by the way, very senior people in organization. So senior people in organization are two types. One are senior people who understand technology, and the other one who basically pretend they understand technology. The ones who pretend they understand technology are now going to be understanding it a little bit more because of this experience. And they're going to basically ask, why are we doing things the same way? You know, just like, at least I read with, you know, which is Bob Iger, who's sort of come back to be the CEO of Disney. He says, I have to create a Disney with fewer people. And I also have to basically say, why am I doing stupid things like TV upfronts?
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think that means for something like Quibi, where, you know, again, high production value, high cost, and especially now, very short format meant to be consumed in between travel and meetings?
So when I first heard about Quibi, my thing was, it's either going to be a great success or it's going to be a great failure. And the reason for the great success was obviously the people behind it, who are amazingly successful, brilliant people, right? And their networks and their connections, and the fact that storytelling can be very important, and some of their supposed technology. Having played around with it once it's come out, I am now in the basic belief we are going to see a great failure, right? And that's primarily because the stuff sucks. The content sucks, okay? And my whole basic belief is the content just sucks. And now when and in effect, they've taken away choice from me, because, you know, you can only see it on a mobile device. When we're all sitting at home watching television, right? It doesn't allow you to use AirPlay. It doesn't allow you to use anything. So they've said, we know better. So what they've actually ended up doing is they've used huge budgets to provide crap. So I wish, and especially in a place where people are budget conscious. So I have a feeling that it ain't going to work, and it's going to go down basically as a failure.
Yeah. Okay. And let's go to, looks like, let me turn on your video. Colette Brooks had a question. I'm unmuting you, turning on your video.
Hi.
Hi,
Hi.
Hi.
Hi there.
Hello.
So, hi there. I have a thought about Quibi, that Quibi may not be for you and I've been experiencing it also, and I share your sentiment. It actually, it might be for Gen Z because this is what they use. So I don't know, jury's out.
The only problem with Gen Z is that they have other things to do, including TikTok,
True,
right?
True.
And my whole basic belief is Quibi is not better than TikTok.
right. Right, be interesting. So my question is actually kind of going back to Drew, your comment about the discount economy, and if that's really in the cards, isn't this going to inform a domino effect downstream, like lower margins, higher unemployment, less consumer spending? So can you speak to that?
So lower prices doesn't necessarily mean lower margins, because, right, it could mean there's less margin to go around, but some companies we may actually move to a higher margin economy. So one of the reasons to sort of explain, right, and obviously today the market is down, right, but when you basically sort of think that the market is off now 15% versus 38%. So what are people basically thinking? Right, which is when you actually think about this is likely to be longer, et cetera, and who knows, nobody knows where the market's going to go. I think the first thing what people are beginning to realize is the companies that are going to be dominating are going to be bigger, right? Bigger companies tend to have scale-based economies. Number two is the ability to have radical competition to a certain extent disappears for a little while because people don't fund a lot of these startups, which is important. Third is the most successful companies supposedly are giving you stuff for free, but are the most powerful, right? So there's sort of different economies that doesn't matter. What I think will basically happen is there'll be a recalibrating of the economy, which is regardless of who gets elected in, next year or this November and therefore takes over next year, it's going to be one where there is going to be a redistribution of wealth from people who don't spend it to people who have to spend it. So what we also have to realize is most of the wealth is in 10% of the United States, but they save most of their money, right? And a lot of people don't have ends to meet. There is going to be redistribution because either you have redistribution or you're going to have a revolution.
Josh, someone sent me a question privately, which I do think is interesting. I'd like to throw in here. Rishad, your thoughts on this, on the impact on education? And particularly, Rita was talking last week about what is the value of a digital or virtual course. Should I be paying $80,000 a year to go to Harvard Business School or what? But whether it's on the high end and the very premium type of high end education or just education in general, I'm not sure if you thought much about this. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I've thought a bit about this because I actually do a lot of work with the University of Chicago where I went to school. And right now, for instance, you probably know that between 70 to 80% of the students at Wharton, Stanford, and others have demanded that their fees be returned to them for this past quarter, right? And the big argument right now is they're basically saying because at Stanford or University of Chicago, in your entire education, including living and housing, costs $250,000 for 2 years, right? So what they're basically saying is, hey, I want my $40,000 or $30,000 back for this thing. The universities are basically saying, we actually provide greater value and you're getting a great deal because in effect, you aren't actually paying your full thing. It's coming out from endowments and all of that, and our endowments are down. What I think is going to basically happen is the following. Universities are going to have to take significant cost cuts because the reality of it is 75 to 80% of the dollars that go to universities have got nothing to do with education. They've basically got to keep a whole bunch of people employed who should not be employed and build all kinds of buildings that nobody needs, which is number one. Number two is a lot of schools, we've seen this in the business school thing, but you're going to see elsewhere. Many business schools have closed down. Many business schools have moved to 1-year programs. There's no, you could do 1 full year. It's the same as 6 semesters to save money. So there's going to be that. But this is the biggest thing with all this Zoom. And what you miss with education, which is very important, is you learn a lot from your fellow classmates. And you're going to have to, that can never be totally replaced. But what is going to happen, and this is the key thing, is people are going to realize that either we go to the very best schools, or we go to a local craft school that's very good, or we just go online. Because people are beginning to realize you can get the best online. Why the hell am I paying $25,000 for tier 2?
Right.
Right. And one of the things, I'll tell you, this is the biggest problem of one of the things we have to realize is, remember, there is a winner take all thing, which you're beginning to see, obviously, with the large tech companies. I think you're going to see with the universities. You're going to see this across the board. So for instance, people, when let's suppose you speak for a living, okay? Now, all of a sudden, what basically begins to happen, if you speak for a living and you're a Zoomable and Skypeable speaker, you can do 7 or 8 of these at a relatively low cost, and you can take a whole bunch of people out of business. Right. And so that's the thing. What you're basically beginning to see is inventory, right? Demand could become global, but many businesses are going to have this limited inventory, which is, in effect, people can go and get the justice scores from Harvard and the happiness scores from Yale, etc.
Interesting. Josh, let's get back to some other questions.
Great. We have an audio question from Natasha. She's in India and has, I guess, poor bandwidth, so we're just going to bring her in via audio. Natasha, can you hear us?
Yes. Josh, am I audible?
Yes.
Yep. Great.
Hi, Rishad, Natasha. We are connected on LinkedIn, and I had recently read your book and left a comment as well. And it's beautiful. I guess it's just well timed with the economy right now.
Yes, what basically happens, it was out of stock. It's back in stock, thank God.
Awesome. So, Rishad, my question to you is more pertinent for India and the IT tech startups and the ones who are already settled in the business. What I see from the various CIO forums that I have attended so far through webinars, there are organizations which are tech savvy, but they haven't even thought about using technology to transform their workplace. And what I hear from them is they're still struggling to do it, to adapt to the gig economy and to the virtual economy. But at the same time, I do not see a mindset of the CEOs in terms of taking this transition and transformation forward. So what's your view on the developing economies, in terms of how do you see them coming out of this and taking it as a positive stride?
Here's what's happening is, right now, I think, like in India, this is going on at least till May 4th, but I think it might go later, okay? But so I think we've just completed, because I'm from India, so I keep aware of what's going on there, is we've completed 3 of the 5 weeks. What I'm beginning to see is for behavior to change, you need about 4 to 6 weeks. So I began to see CEO behavior change in the United States last week. Because after about 4 to 6 weeks of this, people are beginning to change. I'm beginning to see, for instance, my mother-in-law in India right now, and she's actually forward thinking, but now she's Zooming all over the place, and she's in her 80s. Okay, so I think is going to happen is you'd be surprised at how this will happen. This will change in 2-3 weeks. Like if this goes past May 4th, which I think it will, you're going to see this in May. The other is, unfortunately, I do believe that the emerging markets are going to get hit much worse because, as you know, in India, for instance, 90 million families live in one room. Right? So the whole idea of staying in one room doesn't make sense. So I think this is going to recalibrate India in a very good way. And I know you've got low bandwidth, but I have a belief that Mukesh Ambani and Jio is going to make a big deal of this.
Rishad, just a little bit more on sort of leadership there. And you talked about CEOs and becoming, technologically savvy or pretending, but more broadly on leadership, particularly if maybe people aren't in the office as much anymore, or, what are going to be the traits of a great leader from a business standpoint in sort of this revised work environment and the future of work? Are there going to be new skills that need to be acquired by the C-suite? And whether I manage an office of 5 people and I've got a manufacturing supply company or something.
Yeah. So one of the key things that, when I was doing my book, one of the things I did is I went to like 50% of the time, which fortunately my company allowed me to do for about a year, more than a year, so I could research for the book. So the book wasn't just like me doing normal shit that I do. And what tended to basically happen is I was studying leadership, not only what I'd observed, people I'd reported to, clients, but I read a lot about leadership. And I brought it down to just 5 ingredients. And then I stress tested those 5 ingredients in today, and I found those 5 are even more right? So here are the 5 ingredients. And this is not just about being a leader, but it's also about the messaging that you do and every part of your life now. And here are the 5. The first one is capability. Good leaders are capable. And right now, a lot of people say, give me the ball, coach, right? This is it. We're now in the foundry and the furnace of business. This is when real leaders stand up, and real leaders are capable. And you can basically tell today, and I will not go anywhere in the political landscape, when you don't have capability, how it shows or when it shows. And you can check it versus your governor, versus your president, versus your mayor. Okay, just try that. So capability happens to be one. The other 4 are the following. One is integrity. And integrity includes facts, belief in science, trust, transparency. The third one is empathy, right? Can you actually feel for something besides yourself? The fourth one is vulnerability, which is, can you tell people that you don't have a clue, that you yourself are scared, that you are, right? And the 5th one is inspiration, which is, can you give people clarity, energy, and belief in themselves and hope after this? So those are the 5. And when you actually think about those 5, those are more needed today than ever before. Capability, empathy, integrate, vulnerability, and inspiration.
And inspiration, yeah. Well, let's get back to some questions. Thank you for that, Rishad. I wrote those 5 down, and I couldn't agree with you more.
So yeah, let's go to Mark Blumenthal. Hey, Mark, you're on.
Hi, Rishad. Thanks so much for taking my question. So my question is this: how will the significant increase in poverty here in the United States and elsewhere, or shall we say the have-nots, impact the capitalist system as we know it and business in general?
So the basic idea of capitalism, which has been around for a long time, but has been pushed forth dramatically over the last few years, has basically been from the University of Chicago. So University of Chicago, Milton Friedman, the Chicago School, etc. What people don't realize is about 5-6 years ago, the Chicago School started to change. And their basic belief was, how do we save capitalism from the capitalists? Because in effect, capitalism is really about competition, and capitalism is basically about having a free market that works. And when free markets work, you need trampolines, which when something doesn't work out, and you need ladders, which is called education. And what has tended to basically happen is, I was just talking to Raghu Rajan, who is a major professor. He used to be the Reserve Bank governor of India and the head of the IMF. And he's written a book called The Third Pillar. And it's all about community and people. So I think what you're going to basically see is capitalism is going to basically get back to be what it's supposed to be. And what's really interesting is the world, including the United States, thrived very well, by the way, between the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. And it was a capitalistic thing, but there were things like unions. So for instance, one of the things I'm anticipating is there are going to be unions again, because people are going to basically, who are working out there, are going to say, okay, people have put us in, they pay us nothing and we're almost going to kill ourselves. So you're going to see all kinds of stuff. So I truly believe that we're going to move to a place where capitalism isn't about I, me, mine, but capitalism is basically allowing innovation, allowing people to grow wealth. But only way to do it is you need to basically have a society. So just like I've basically always said that, these Googles and Facebooks are not advertising operating systems, they're society operating systems. I've always believed that we need to focus on and optimize for the citizen and not for the consumer, which happens to be capitalistic.
I know we have about 10 minutes left, so I'd like to at least get to 1 or 2 more questions here.
Sure. So Azim had sent in a question and asked me to ask Rishad your thoughts on, the geopolitical implications of the current crisis and how this will impact, business and trade going forward.
Yeah,
So
and I'd like to just add on to that in terms of context, Rishad, just sort of your view. You've had such great global experiences, not just working for a French company, but traveling all over the world. On top of that, or with that, impact on the global sort of consumer and other markets and
sure.
as well. Yeah.
So first of all, fundamentally, let me basically say that I think globalization is unstoppable. Okay, and it's been a minority opinion even till COVID-19, and now people think I've turned insane. But let me explain to you why. Okay, the first thing is globalization took 2 billion people out of poverty. That's number one. Number two, the things that we're trying to stop, we basically believe that the West, with 850 million people, can tell 6.2 billion people how to do stuff, right? But globalization is of different flavors. It's not just a United States flavor or a European flavor. That's the first thing. Second is, do recognize, as I've always told people, immigrants are not crossing the border. It's basically people who are running from bullets who are crossing the border. Most immigrants are coming on planes, so you can't build a 32,000-foot wall. But as importantly, this virus, whatever you call it, right? It came from a different part of the world. It came into the United States. No, you could stop planes. Nothing stopped it. The reality of it is, as long as the virus is anywhere, it's everywhere. The biggest mistake we're making is not looking at this as something that we have to solve globally. So this getting out of WHO is the stupidest thing that anybody could actually do. This is a world problem, right? Everything's a world problem. The reality of it is, if you close your borders and give up, nobody has jobs, their economies crash and they come going into the countries that work well. So the reality of it is, we are globally interconnected, whether we like it or not. However, what we have to basically do is we've got to have resilience in the system. And so therefore, I believe that you're going to constantly see two models. And therefore, I've said the future, unlike Andy Grove, who basically said only the paranoid will survive, which makes no sense in a connected world, right? I believe only the schizophrenic will thrive, which basically means you will simultaneously see two models, and you'll see the mongrelization of everything. So you'll basically there'll be nothing like a digital company, and there'll be nothing like an offline company. All companies will be mongrels. There'll be no like pure breeds, right? Very much like when everybody marries, there'll be mongrels. So that's the whole thing. So what tends to basically happen is, I truly believe that you're going to see nationalist, community-driven things and a global thing, not one or the other. But fundamentally, almost all advances are global. Technology is global. Fine, you can build a China wall, right? And then you can build the rest of the world, but it's primarily global. Biotechnology is global. If you're going to have no travel, you're going to basically have a big problem. So all of tourism, which is 11% of the world's economy, closes, right? So interestingly, it's very easy to basically say the other person sucks and immigrants suck and globalization sucks and calling this virus like, Chinese virus. Get over it. We are human beings first, and we're global. And then we have to obviously recognize we live in a society. And what we don't have a globalization problem. We have a goddamn leadership problem. We got sucky leaders. We better vote properly.
Right. Drew's on mute. Hold on, Drew. You're.
I was just going to say, let's do one more. I think one more question, and then we'll start to wrap up.
Sure. Let's go over to Bruce Brandfon had a question. Bruce, you should be unmuted now, and please start your video if you can.
Sure. There's my video. Hey, Rishad, thank you so much. This is amazing as always. And thank you, Techonomy and CDX. This is super. My question really, and it pales in comparison with your last comment, so forgive me for being prosaic, but was part of the shift on the marketing side happened when agencies began to be rewarded for the cost of acquisition of media as opposed to the quality of the messaging that they were creating? What's your opinion about that?
I think what basically happened is, and I've been through all the sort of phases, what tended to happen is, we used to get paid in a very strange and very unusual way for outcome. And we started getting paid for input, and which we then sort of spot the outcome. What do I mean? In the old days, and I'm not saying we necessarily come back, But we used to get a commission on all media spent. And it didn't matter what media you did, you just paid a commission. And when the client spent more, your fees went up. And when the client spent less, your fees went down. And you basically did not spend 20 to 30% of your manpower running budgets and Excel spreadsheets and FTEs and dealing with procurement. So I believe about 15 to 20% of most companies, not just agency companies, 15 to 20%, when you think about friction, is a bunch of people running Excel spreadsheets which should be burned. So and it's just not our business, it's every business. Like there's a famous book which says that most jobs are fake. I don't think most jobs are fake. I think 1 out of every 4 jobs are fake, okay, which are completely made up jobs. So all of this is that. But one of the key things is we therefore were built on basically what your expenses were. And so what your costs were. So everybody was basically about cost. And we lost the plot that the business was really about not just ideas, but about driving outcomes. And even being paid like on leads and all that is very stupid, because most businesses that have lots of leads have turned out to have useless businesses. Okay, I've been studying all of this, which is if you go the second level of math. But what I think we now need to get back to is some form of like partnership, not only between agencies and clients or between clients and their other suppliers, but the entire idea is, if the only way you can grow your business is by being cannibalistic with your partners, you don't have a business, right? My whole stuff is cannibalism is not healthy. And what we were basically doing in different systems is we were cannibalizing each other versus actually going and hunting in the jungle for some animal, maybe the bat that bit whoever did this to us, right? That kind of thing.
That's great, Rishad. Vivid as always. We're going to wrap up here, but sort of our parting shot for me, just it's hard because we've never been through something like this, as you said. This is unique, and everybody's health and safety is of course most important. But thinking about that consumer on the other side, what are the signals that people can look for in regards to what this world will look like on the other side? And we didn't really talk about me asking this question of you, so I'll drag it on just a bit so you can start to think about it. But what does that consumer society look like, or our society in general? But what are the signals we can look for? Where can we get hints as to how things are going to evolve?
So, I think it's primarily look at people, look at people as humans. And I've always basically believed that what people are looking for is, number one, they're looking for purpose, which is what do they do a good job, right? They're looking for connections, both connections which are family connections, friends, they're looking for that. And most importantly, they're looking for growth, both financial, economic, and human growth. And those are the fundamental things that people are looking for. And if you can deliver that to them with some form of safety and security that's good for society, you win.